In the 1997 film The Devil's Advocate, Kevin Lomax is a hotshot Southern defense attorney. He makes headlines when he successfully defends an obviously guilty child molester by eviscerating his naive underage victim on the stand. Soon after, he is invited to New York for a trial run at an extremely prestigious high-end law firm. He manages to impress the head of the firm, the darkly charismatic John Milton, who ushers him into a world of obscene wealth and access to some of the most powerful people in the country. Kevin takes to his lavish new life like a fish to water, but Kevin's wife Marianne struggles with her newfound isolation and her feelings of paranoia around her new high society gal pals. As Marianne becomes increasingly unhinged, seeing demons hiding in the bodies of her friends, Kevin embeds himself deeper in Milton's world. In his next big trial, he knowingly allows false testimony to successfully acquit Alex Cullen, a Trump-like figure who he realizes too late has murdered his wife to bed his stepdaughter. As he wrestles with this, Marianne tells Kevin that Milton raped her, except she claims this happened during a time when Milton was never out of Kevin's sight, and he angrily rejects her story. After she's committed to a mental hospital, she kills herself, believing demonic forces have taken over her life. After this, Kevin's hyper-religious mother reveals a shocking truth. John Milton impregnated her when she was a teenager on a mission trip to the city. Kevin confronts Milton, who admits to raping Marianne and reveals his true identity. He is the devil. What follows is a rhetorical sparring session where Kevin accuses Milton of causing all manner of evil in the world, and Milton explains that he merely sets the stage for humans to choose to indulge in the desires they already have. Milton insists that human beings have always had free will and that he's simply a master of knowing what they can't resist. Kevin accuses Milton of setting him up to defend the guilty Cullen, but Milton forces Kevin to admit the truth. Kevin is too proud to lose, even if it means setting a monster free. In fact, the entire film, Milton had been advising Kevin to focus on his wife, to be willing to lose the case, but it was Kevin who needed to win. As Milton reveals his master plan, which involves just a teeny amount of incest, Kevin decides to exercise his free will one last time and put a bullet in his head. Man, they're never gonna let me monetize this one. The film is about a lot of things, and the most obvious themes are religious or cosmological in nature. What does it mean to have free will? Where is God when the devil runs rampant? Are we truly doomed to feel our sins crawling on our back until we die? However, on my most recent viewing, I was struck by a different theme threaded throughout the film. Kevin's adventure begins when he uses aggressive rhetorical tactics to convince a jury to exonerate a pedophile math teacher so guilty, Kevin sees him rubbing himself during the victim's tearful testimony. Later, as Kevin makes love to his wife, he keeps having visions of her turning into his colleague Christabella, a woman he has been sexually fixated upon since the moment he saw her. Weeks later, Kevin knowingly lets a witness lie on the stand to convince a jury to exonerate the billionaire Cullen, who is seducing his teenage stepdaughter. Meanwhile, Marianne's account of her rape at the hands of John Milton begins with her saying that she was so isolated and depressed, she actually kind of wanted it at first, until she didn't. When pressed by Milton to have apocalyptic sex with Christabella, who is revealed to be his half-sister, Kevin ultimately chooses death instead. The most consequential plot beats in the film revolve around questions of sexual consent, which I think is a fascinating, though heavy way to engage with the film's interest in free will. After all, what is consent if not free will made manifest? It's no accident that the film's opening scenes revolve around the math teacher. In both the context of the film as well as our own real-world value systems, this teacher forcefully groping a student is beyond the pale. The student is clearly traumatized by the incident, weeping as she tells the tale. The film presents us with an unambiguous scenario of non-consent as a kind of a baseline, a stable foundation from which we can engage with some of the more complex sexual situations in the film. Now, I want to be clear, I am not saying that the next two situations are in any way consensual, nor am I trying to paint them as some kind of gray area open to debate. I only mean to highlight that they bring additional angles to the idea of sexual consent that I think the film wants us to think about. In an echo of the math teacher, Cullen is revealed to be seducing, if not outright raping, his teenage stepdaughter. However, the film does something interesting here. During this reveal, the stepdaughter is shown to be smiling, by all appearances happy to be in Cullen's presence as he strokes her back. Kevin is horrified to see that other people from the law firm are noticing and nodding approvingly. This calls to mind a number of incidents in real life of female teachers raping underage male students that result in popular culture cheering on the teen boy and treating the whole thing like some sexy mischief. The film rightly shows this behavior to be monstrous. While it's natural that many teenagers are experiencing sexual awakenings as they grow towards adulthood, it is unequivocally harmful for older authority figures to exploit that. It is an abuse of unequal power dynamics, particularly in Cullen's case, since not only is he a parental figure, he's a billionaire too. Later, Kevin's wife Marianne describes being home alone when John Milton enters and begins seducing her. As she tells the story, she notes that she'd been feeling so isolated and alienated that at first she kind of wanted it. However, at some point the encounter turns violent and Milton ignores her demands to stop. Particularly by this point in the film, Marianne has been shown to be suffering from extreme mental distress and anxiety. Her isolation is either the cause of or being exacerbated by her visions of demons lurking in the law firm. No one is listening to her as her cries for help become more and more extreme. That's why I think it's interesting that the film takes care to tell us that she kind of wanted the initial sexual contact with Milton. To me, this calls to mind countless stories of psychiatrists and other mental health care professionals manipulating and raping their patients. If the Cullen situation is about how authority and power subvert free will, here I think Marianne's situation is exploring how manipulation, isolation, and yes, even gaslighting can subvert free will as well. If someone is being psychologically abused and pushed to withdraw from their friends and family until they are depressed and desperate, how much willing, enthusiastic consent are they really capable of? I'm not saying that people with mental illnesses can't consent to sex. What I'm saying is that in Marianne's case, her environment is not loving or healthy, she's not receiving any form of care or support, she's barely sleeping, so it seems like her state of mind is not, at the moment, equipped to exercise her free will the way she would want to under better circumstances. If you locked someone in solitary confinement for 6 months, deprived them of sleep, and then opened the door and said, "Hey, want to have sex?" Do you honestly think they're going to be making a free choice at that point? Of course not. Interestingly, this discussion of consent goes beyond lurid sexual abuses in the film. In the 2 jury trials we see in the film, the math teacher and Cullen, Kevin sees his role as winning over, may I say, seducing a jury. Several times in the film, he or other characters make reference to him exerting dominance over juries to achieve his goals. Yet in these 2 cases, and perhaps many others unseen in the film, Kevin wins over the jury either by withholding true information or allowing false information to trick the jury. I think this brings up an interesting point. If someone consents to something under false pretenses, did they really consent? In the film, Kevin uses lies to win court cases. But let's go back to the film's interest in sexual consent for a moment and imagine that Kevin used lies to get laid. Can we truly say a partner gave enthusiastic consent if their decision was based on a lie? What about a tactical withholding of truth? If power dynamics and mental health dynamics can subvert someone's free will, couldn't information dynamics as well? Unless you think I'm trying to crowbar a fancy feminist reading into this film, I think this is part of the film's larger exploration of what free will means in a universe where an unknowable God makes all the rules and gives us none of the information, instead simply threatening us with infinite punishment. God, a being with unlimited power, creates a world and intentionally lets it fill up with evil and suffering, then claims following him is the only way to know true peace. In fact, he says, "Love me freely or burn in hell for eternity." Is any love given in this relationship truly consensual if behind it lies the threat of unimaginable torture? God could proactively reveal himself and end all suffering and sickness, thereby inviting a spontaneous and sincere outpouring of gratitude and loyalty, but he chooses not to. He stays veiled behind layers of mystery in a world that feels cruel and chaotic. Is this truly an affirmation of our free will? Do you feel like you have all the information and all the agency and safety needed to make a free choice? We'll leave that for the theologians to decide. For the rest of us mere mortals, the Devil's Advocate provides several case studies in the concept of sexual consent and, in my opinion, demands that we take these questions seriously. Consent isn't violated only in a back alley rape or during a booze-soaked Brett Kavanaugh frat party. Consent can be violated when someone with lots of power lords themselves over someone with very little power. Consent can be violated when someone knowingly exploits another person's mental fragility or emotional instability. And consent can be violated when someone controls the information space in a way that prevents another person from making the right choice for them. So, how can we make sure that we're not violating consent? Well, it's different for every situation, but it starts with giving a shit about it in the first place. Deep down, you know whether you are making choices for yourself or with another person. You know what's in your heart when you interact with someone. Are you taking the time to evaluate the situation with their dignity in mind? Are you giving them the space and safety to tell you no? Are you taking advantage to get what you want? Or are you taking care to create an experience both of you can thrive within? The Devil's Advocate places Kevin Lomax, and indeed the entire audience, between an omnipotent yet absent God and a lying, rapacious devil. I think you and I are quite capable of being better than either of them.